So, next time you board a commercial flight, I want you to just pause for a second and, look through the open flight deck door.
Right. While everyone is shuffling down the aisle.
Exactly. You look in and you see the captain sitting in the left seat. They've got the four strikes on their shoulder. They're flipping switches, and they just look completely, unequivocally in charge.
Oh, absolutely. They look like the boss.
Yeah. And as a passenger, it's like incredibly easy to think that's the whole operation right there.
Yeah.
But that is actually an illusion.
The very carefully constructed illusion.
Right. Because they're every single move. I mean, every decision they make from engine start to engine shutdown is being dictated by this massive, invisible corporate hierarchy that's, well, hidden completely on the ground.
Yeah, it really is an entire universe operating behind the scenes.
And they are bound by a set of rules so strict that breaking them isn't just, bad company policy. It is literally breaking the law.
It is the law.
Yeah.
Because aviation, it isn't simply the mechanics of keeping an aluminum tube in the sky.
Yeah.
It's a highly engineered ecosystem of accountability. The whole system is structured so that every drop of fuel, every swapped out bolt, every route change, it all has a clear paper trail. And more importantly, a very specific human being attached to it who is legally responsible.
Which is wild to think about. And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are taking the source material we've gathered and, well, we're using it to decode the true anatomy of an airline operator.
It's a fascinating structure.
It really is. So we're going to explore this hidden corporate hierarchy on the ground, unpack the ultimate rulebook that governs every single flight, and reveal the specific, sometimes really surprising legal duties of the crew in the air.
That's good.
Let's start at the absolute top of the food chain with a role the sources refer to as the accountable manager. So usually this is the managing director or the CEO of the airline, right?
Yeah, typically the CEO.
And their job description is just immense. They have ultimate responsibility for the company's safety, its legality, and of course, its commercial viability.
Right, because the accountable manager is the individual who, at the end of the day, controls the purse strings.
The budget.
Exactly, the budget. And that is actually their most critical function when it comes to safety. They supply the resources.
So if maintenance needs something expensive.
Right. If the maintenance department needs, say, a $5 million new diagnostic system to ensure the aircraft are safe, the accountable manager is the one who has to write that check.
Wow. Okay.
And because they hold that financial power, the regulatory authorities look straight at them if there's a systemic failure within the airline. The buck stops right in their office.
Which has to be incredibly stressful.
Oh, definitely. They are constantly balancing the absolute necessity of safe legal operations with the reality that the airline also has to, actually survive in a highly competitive commercial market.
Right. They have to make money. But they don't operate in a vacuum. Beneath the accountable manager, you find this layer of management called the nominated post holders.
Yes, the post holders.
And if you think of like a typical corporate structure, these would look like vice presidents or department heads, I guess. But the sources highlight a pretty wild twist here.
They do.
Because these aren't just fancy corporate titles handed out by the CEO. The National Aviation Authority has to literally vet and approve these specific individuals.
Yeah, they do. And it fundamentally changes the power dynamic of the entire company.
How so?
Well, you have four main areas that require a nominated post holder. You've got flight operations, ground operations, crew training, and maintenance. And the technical requirements for these roles are just incredibly high.
They aren't just MBAs.
No, not at all. For instance, the maintenance post holder usually needs a specialized engineering degree along with years of acceptable hands-on experience.
Sure.
They aren't administrators who just happen to work at an airline.
Right.
They are deep technical experts in their specific fields.
Wait, hold on a second. The airline pays these post holders salaries, right? But you're telling me their ultimate loyalty, legally, is to the government regulators. So, if a flight operations post holder grounds a flight because of a safety concern, losing the airline thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
why doesn't the accountable manager just fire them for hurting the bottom line?
Because if the accountable manager fires them for prioritizing safety, the aviation authority can instantly revoke the airline's operating certificate.
Wait, really? Just shut the whole thing down?
Just ground the entire airline.
Yeah.
That tension you were pointing out, that is the exact point of the entire system.
Oh, so it's a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. The authorities demand this embedded structure precisely to prevent corporate profits from overriding safety. Think of nominated post holders almost like government health inspectors who are permanently embedded inside a restaurant's kitchen.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The restaurant pays their salary, but those inspectors hold the keys to the padlocks on the front door.
Wow.
So if the accountable manager pushes to, say, fly a route with an under-rested crew to save some money, the post holder has the absolute authority to step in and say no. They are the internal regulatory shield.
And what's wild is that the chief pilot, the person who actually manages the day-to-day flying and the pilot roster, isn't usually a nominated post holder.
That's right.
The chief pilot reports to the flight operations post holder. So the person managing the pilots is still subordinate to this, like, regulatory enforcer.
Exactly.
But the organizational chart gets even more interesting because there is another role that exists completely outside this chain of command, right? The flight safety officer, or FSO.
Yes, the FSO. The flight safety officer serves as the independent conscience of the airline.
The conscience, I like that.
It really is. They bypass the chief pilot entirely. They bypass the nominated post holders. They have a direct, unmediated line to the top management, straight to the accountable manager.
So they don't have to filter their reports through anyone?
Exactly. And the source text explicitly states that an FSO should only have this one job. They cannot wear multiple hats.
So they can't be, like, a line-checking pilot and the FSO at the same time.
Right, because they have to remain entirely impartial.
And their main tool for doing this is something called the Mandatory Occurrence Reporting Scheme, or MORS.
Yeah.
And from what I read, the FSO's entire day is basically spent collecting hazard reports, near misses, and safety data from across the airline.
Yep, they are data gatherers.
So say a baggage handler notices a frayed strap on a cargo loader, or, I don't know, a pilot misreads an altimeter but catches it at the last second. The FSO collects all these disparate pieces of data, looks for trends, and then just circulates that information back through the company to prevent future accidents.
Exactly, but to do that effectively, the FSO relies entirely on raw, honest data.
Which means people have to tell the truth.
Right. They need the pilots, the engineers, the dispatchers, and the cabin crew to voluntarily raise their hands and say, hey, something went wrong today.
See, okay, I understand reporting a broken piece of equipment. But if I'm a pilot, right, and I make a genuine mistake like I miss a checklist item or I calculate my approach speed incorrectly, why in the world would I voluntarily write a report and hand it to the flight safety officer? I mean, that sounds like volunteering to get fired.
And that right there is the single biggest psychological hurdle in aviation safety. Overcoming that fear is the FSO's true job.
Because it's human nature to hide mistakes.
Exactly. But the aviation industry learned decades ago that punishing honest mistakes simply drives those mistakes underground. People hide them, the system never learns from them, and eventually that same hidden mistake kills someone.
Oh, wow. So you have to know about it to fix it.
Right. So the reporting scheme is strictly about accident prevention. It's never about assigning blame. It focuses on finding out why a mistake happened, not who did it.
So looking at the system itself.
Exactly. Was the checklist poorly designed? Was the cockpit lighting bad? Was the crew scheduling causing, severe fatigue?
But so how does an airline actually guarantee that? Like, how do I know I won't get fired?
By legally cultivating what the industry calls a just culture.
Just culture.
Yeah. In a just culture, there is an ironclad agreement. If you make an honest error and you report it immediately through the MORS, you are immune from punitive action by the company.
Immune. Really?
Yes. Now, obviously, this doesn't cover gross negligence or intentional sabotage.
You can just do whatever you want.
Right. But if it's a genuine human error, the FSO protects your identity, fixes the underlying systemic issue, and uses your mistake to train everyone else. The FSO is there to fix the environment, not to punish the individual.
That is amazing. Okay, so we have the accountable manager funding the operation, the post holders enforcing the standards, and the FSO acting as the independent safety conscience.
Right.
But how do all these people actually communicate the daily rules to a company of, like, 10,000 employees? You can't just send a company-wide email saying, hey, everyone, be safe today.
No, you certainly can't do that. You need a codified, centralized set of laws. And that brings us to the ultimate rulebook, the operations manual. Ooh, yeah, the OM. The source material compares this to military standing orders. Once this manual is drafted by the airline and approved by the National Aviation Authority, it is no longer just a company handbook.
It's way more serious than that.
It carries the full force of subordinate legislation.
Which means it is literally the law for the employees of that airline.
Exactly. Violating the operations manual is a legal offense.
And the scale of this manual is staggering. It often runs to thousands of pages, and it's broken down into 4 massive sections, parts A, B, C, and D.
Right. And to understand how these 4 parts interact, imagine a scenario.
Okay.
You have a commercial flight scheduled to depart Anchorage, Alaska at, say, 2:00 a.m., and a massive snowstorm is rolling in.
Sounds stressful.
Very. But the crew sitting in the flight deck isn't calling corporate headquarters to ask what to do. They don't have to, because the answers are already in the book.
Right. So first, they pull out Part A. This is the general or basic section. It covers the core company policies, operational control, and non-type-related instruction.
Yep, the overarching rules.
So in our Anchorage scenario, Part A would dictate the general company policy for winter weather operations, right? And like how long the crew is legally allowed to remain on duty while delayed by that snow.
Exactly. And while checking those duty limits, the commander turns to Part C, which is the Route and Aerodrome Guide.
Okay, Part C.
This section contains the highly specific navigation maps, the communication frequencies, and the operating minima for the specific routes and airports they use.
So they're real local details.
Right. Part C will tell the commander the exact minimum visibility required, like down at the meter, to legally attempt to take off on Anchorage's runway 15.
But let's add a wrinkle. Right before pushback, a fault light illuminates on the instrument panel. A specific temperature sensor on the left engine has failed.
A very common real-world scenario.
Right. And as a passenger, you always assume the plane is 100% perfect when it takes off. But airplanes are incredibly complex machines and things break.
They break all the time.
So does the crew just cancel the flight? No, they open Part B, the aircraft operating matters.
Because Part B contains the standard operating procedures for the individual type of aircraft they are flying, whether that's a Boeing 737 or an Airbus A320.
It's specific to the plane.
Exactly. And crucially, it contains the MEL.
The minimum equipment list.
Yes, the MEL.
The MEL is fascinating to me. It is a strictly engineered list of redundancies that dictates exactly what broken parts an aircraft can legally dispatch with.
Exactly. The crew doesn't guess if the broken sensor is dangerous.
Right, no guessing. They open the MEL, find that specific temperature sensor, and the manual gives them a legally binding binary answer.
It's very black and white.
It might say, yes, you can fly with the sensor inoperative, but you cannot fly into known icing conditions. Or it might say, no, the aircraft is permanently grounded until the sensor is replaced. It completely removes the guesswork for the frontline workers.
And tying all of this together is Part D, which covers training.
Part D, right.
Part D outlines the rigorous syllabuses and checking programs for all personnel. It is the framework used to guarantee that the crew sitting in Anchorage actually has the required competencies to properly interpret Parts A, B, and C.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, the operations manual exists to empower employees to make autonomous, safe, and legal decisions in highly stressful environments.
Okay, so let's follow that crew into the air. Let's talk about the person sitting in the left seat, the sky boss. The commander, or the pilot in command, the PIC.
The PIC, right?
The source material outlines a very specific time frame for their authority, which I found really interesting. The moment an airplane is ready to taxi for takeoff, all the way until it comes to rest at the end of the flight and the engines are shut down, the commander is legally responsible for the safety of everyone and everything on board.
And reaching that left seat requires immense qualification. They need an airline transport pilot license, an ATPL, or a commercial pilot license with very specific hour requirements.
Like what?
For example, a minimum of 700 hours of flight time just to operate under instrument flight rules, or IFR.
And for someone who might not know, flying under instrument flight rules means flying purely by reference to the dials and screens in the flight deck.
Exactly.
It's what allows a plane to fly through dense clouds or, total darkness where the pilots have absolutely zero outside visibility.
Precisely. They also have to demonstrate intimate knowledge of the specific routes and aerodromes they are operating in. But with those high qualifications comes a very heavy, unavoidable burden of responsibility.
They carry the weight.
They do. The text is very clear that the commander owns every operational failure during their time frame.
Every failure.
Every failure. If the aircraft lands with less than the legally required final reserve fuel, which is the absolute minimum fuel needed to fly for 30 minutes at 1,500 feet,
Yeah.
it is the commander's fault.
Wow.
If the load sheet, which dictates the weight and balance of the aircraft, is calculated incorrectly by the ground crew.
Even if the ground crew did it.
Yep. If the ground crew did it and the commander accepts it, it becomes the commander's fault.
They carry all that legal liability. Does that mean the commander's basically like a dictator once the cabin doors close?
Whoa.
Like if a passenger is causing a severe disruption or an engine starts vibrating violently, can they just throw out the rule book and do whatever they want to ensure safety?
They hold absolute authority, yes, but it is strictly bound by the operations manual.
So not a total dictator.
No, not at all. They are not empowered to invent new rules. They are empowered to execute the manual. Now, they certainly have the authority to offload unruly passengers. They can officially declare emergencies, and they can deviate from a filed flight plan if safety absolutely demands it.
Right.
But the moment they step outside normal procedures, a massive mechanism of scrutiny kicks in. They must document and legally justify every single deviation.
They have to explain themselves.
Extensively. Their authority is immense, but the parameters are incredibly tight. They are also bound by strict fitness rules. A commander cannot legally perform their duties if they are fatigued, under the influence of any substance, or physically unfit.
Which brings us to the crucial safety net sitting right next to them in the right seat. The first officer.
The first officer, yes.
Obviously, first officers are fully qualified pilots. They fly the plane, they handle the radios, they execute pre-flight checks. But the source material highlights a really fascinating, almost psychological detail about their role.
It's a very unique dynamic.
It really is. It notes that first officers often have the most difficult time on the flight deck because they need intense tact and diplomacy to satisfy the, and I quote, whims of the captain.
Yeah, it is a profound human element that aviation has had to engineer around. Imagine, a 25-year-old first officer flying with a 55-year-old captain who has 30 years of experience.
Right, huge experience gap.
Exactly. And every captain has a slightly different management style, a slightly different rhythm, even while operating strictly within the standard operating procedures. The first officer has to constantly adapt to those different personalities while still performing highly technical flying duties.
Because they aren't just there to be a backup pilot in case the commander passes out.
No, absolutely not.
They are an active, highly critical component of crew resource management, or CRM. They are legally required to actively monitor the flight path continuously, and the sources get very specific about this duty to intervene.
They do, and for good reason. In the past, junior pilots were sometimes afraid to speak up to senior captains, which led to tragic accidents.
That makes sense, the intimidation factor.
Right. So today, the first officer is designed to be a human alarm system. If the aircraft's rate of descent exceeds 1,000 feet per minute during an approach, the first officer is legally obligated to loudly call out that deviation.
And another specific example the sources give is monitoring the instrument landing system, the ILS.
Yes.
Which is the electronic beam that guides the plane directly down the center line of the runway in bad weather. If the first officer sees the indicator show a half-scale deflection,
meaning the plane is drifting dangerously far off that safe electronic path.
right, they must immediately speak up and alert the commander. They have to, legally correct their boss in real time.
The commander might hold the ultimate authority, but the first officer is there to ensure that authority is being exercised safely and squarely within the bounds of the operations manual. It is a continuous, high-stakes cross-check.
And that safety net extends out of the flight deck, through the reinforced door, and right into the cabin. We have to look at the cabin crew.
Yes, the cabin crew.
I think the average traveler views flight attendants primarily through the lens of hospitality. You see them pouring coffee, handing out snacks, or, helping with a jammed overhead bin.
Of course, that's the visible part.
It's incredibly easy to forget what their actual mandated job is.
The hospitality and service are entirely secondary. Their primary legal duty is the safety of the aircraft and its occupants. I mean, the national aviation authorities do not mandate how many people an airline employs to serve drinks.
Right, no one cares about the drinks. The sources outline a strict, non-negotiable legal ratio. An airline must have at least one cabin crew member for every 50 passengers, or a fraction of 50.
Yes, the 1-to-50 rule.
So you have 50 passengers, you need one cabin crew member. If you have 51 passengers...
You legally need two.
Exactly.
And their duties are rigorously defined safety management protocols. They are responsible for securing the entire cabin environment for the critical phases of takeoff and landing.
Like making sure tray tables are up.
Right. And ensuring heavy baggage is stowed so it doesn't become a lethal projectile during severe turbulence. They brief passengers on emergency exits. And in a worst-case scenario, their job is to manage a panicked, smoke-filled cabin and execute a full evacuation in under 90 seconds.
90 seconds? That's intense.
Very. And if an airline assigns more than one cabin crew member to a flight, which is almost always the case, there must be a designated senior cabin crew member.
Oh, to lead them.
Yes. This person coordinates the cabin team and communicates directly with the commander, linking the back of the airplane to the ultimate authority in the front.
It is about extending that unbroken chain of command from the accountable manager's office on the ground straight down the aisle of the airplane at 35,000 feet.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's step back and look at the massive picture we've mapped out today. We started at the absolute top of the iceberg with the accountable manager, the person holding the budget, and the ultimate legal responsibility.
Right.
We met the nominated post holders, who act as embedded regulators to ensure profits never eclipse safety. We looked at the flight safety officer, the independent conscience using a just culture to prevent accidents rather than assign blame.
And from there, we traced how all of those safety standards are rigorously codified into the operations manual. Parts A, B, C, and D work together to form the literal binding law for the airline.
Giving frontline workers like our crew in Anchorage with, binary legal answers to complex problems.
Exactly.
Finally, we saw how that law is physically executed in the air. The commander holding absolute authority, yet carrying the massive burden of adhering to the manual. The first officer balancing intense human diplomacy with critical vocal monitoring as part of crew resource management. And the cabin crew, legally mandated by passenger ratios, securing the physical environment behind the flight deck door. It is a meticulously designed web of intentional redundancies.
And that web is precisely why commercial aviation is arguably the safest mode of transportation ever created. Every possible scenario, every mechanical component, and every human interaction have a predetermined procedure and a designated responsible person attached to it.
Nothing is left to chance.
Nothing. The entire structure is designed to catch failures, whether it's a broken engine sensor or a human miscalculation, long before they can cascade into an accident.
But, that leads me to something I want you to mull over as we wrap up today's deep dive. We've seen how the operations manual attempts to script out every single foreseeable emergency.
It tries its best, yeah.
It gives the crew the exact legally binding checklist for an engine failure, a loss of cabin pressure, or a broken altimeter.
Yeah.
But what happens to this rigid chain of command and this strict adherence to the manual when a crew encounters a completely unprecedented crisis?
A black swan event.
Exactly. A scenario so bizarre or complex that it simply isn't in the book. How does a crew balance the absolute legal requirement for compliance with the sudden, terrifying need for creative, split-second problem solving?
That is the ultimate question.
It really is. So next time you step onto a commercial flight and look toward the flight deck, remember that you aren't just trusting the pilot's flying skills. You're trusting their ability to navigate the very tip of a massive, invisible iceberg.